Good morning, everybody. As Helen said, we're bringing together several different strands, and what we're seeking to do is to give you a context, give you the facts, and also to give you our commentary. And we're really pleased to be welcoming Judith Rowland-Jones, who in the middle of our session will be doing some input from the exam board perspective, both about exams as they are now and exams as they will be in the future. So if I just run through the different aspects.
So I'm trying to get David in view as well. There we go.
Lovely. So we're going to look at the curriculum and Ofsted, because we're all in a situation where we can be inspected in the next week or so. And then we'll move into the slightly more controversial areas of the Ofsted curriculum research reviews, the pedagogy review, enselp, and the DfE subject content proposals. Then we'll pass over to Judith Rowland-Jones to give us the facts, and then back to us to give further commentary and look into ways forward. So let's begin with the curriculum, and above all the national curriculum, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3. It's really important that you know what the national curriculum is. Obviously, you'll have created your current schemes of work on the basis of that, but it's important that you're also aware of the changing context around that. In particular, summer 2021, Ofsted published a series of curriculum research reviews for individual subjects. About 7 were published, one of which was modern foreign languages. And at the end of each section, there were a series of high quality teaching may, and I've highlighted that because that word may is absolutely critical statements. And what we found is that, especially in modern languages, there's a real tension between the should, which is what the national curriculum says. The national curriculum says you should do this, that, and the other. And the research review says you may. And we've pushed, and Ofsted have come back and reiterated that it's the national curriculum that takes priority. And we'll give you more information in the following slides. What is the national curriculum? What's its context for schools? Well, maintained schools, those still with the local authority, are expected to study that basic curriculum, including the national curriculum. And then importantly, although back in 2010, the whole thing was around giving freedom, so-called, to academies, they make it really clear that academies essentially should be offering a broad curriculum which is similar in breadth and ambition. So national curriculum is key, whether you're maintained or academy. This was really helpful because as a Surrey head, went to the conference, and Lee Selby, senior HMI for South East, came to the conference, and I was able to highlight with him this tension between the national curriculum and the curriculum review May statements. And he went back to his colleagues at Ofsted in the curriculum department, and he's come back with this email. And it absolutely makes it clear that you stick to the inspection handbook and the national curriculum. The research reviews are just there as around circumstantial. So they are may, but not should. Obviously, the reality is that some inspectors may come in thinking that, but this enables you to be on the front foot, and you can give that email from a senior HMI to say, this is what Ofsted themselves are saying. And now I'll pass over to Helen just to give a very quick overview about the national curriculum. What I would emphasise is that Helen has done a fantastic series of blogs and documentation. So all of these documents and further blogs are available from her blog post. So you don't need to worry about looking at the detail of what's going to be there, because all of this is downloadable from Helen's blog post and website. And
we'll be adding to it. And also we are going to be doing another webinar shortly. So I put in big font there that reminder that the Ofsted emphasis should be on the national curriculum. So just a reminder, I do find that sometimes we get so much into following the schemes of work we've put together, following the textbook, that sometimes we forget what's behind that. And certainly if you've got someone coming out from outside to question you about your curriculum, it really is worthwhile refreshing your memory as to what's the provenance of this, what is the basis of this. So really just go to the internet. It's really, if you haven't got it already, very short, 3 sides for your Key Stage 2 programme of study for the primary, and really, really worthwhile. If you're in secondary, do read what it says for the primary. I've noticed that there have been some tweaks that have been made on the GCSE subject content, which actually reflect what it says on the primary, on the Key Stage 2 national curriculum. So very, very worthwhile making sure that we're familiar with that. Primary know what's happening in secondary, secondary know what's going on in primary. So there we are, and there's the Key Stage 3 programme of study. And here there are purposes and aims which are shared across primary and secondary. So there we are, the purposes, and I've highlighted particularly the important things in the presentations before, of where things in yellow are where actually there's a discrepancy with what is said in the Ofsted curriculum review. So be clear about the fact you are training your students to express their own views about things. It isn't just vocabulary, grammar and phonics, it's to do with communication. They're communicating for practical purposes. Yes, we do want them to be able to know when they go to France, how to ask the waiter somewhere, how to ask where the toilet is, that sort of thing. That is something that we have to do with the national curriculum. So there we have the aims, authentic sources. That is something which is expected on the national curriculum. Speaking, saying what they want to say, and just improving the accuracy of their pronunciation and intonation. So not looking necessarily for perfection. Then you have your attainment targets. And again, I've highlighted how, and here I've highlighted how you progress from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. So that's to do with grammar, building sentences. This is to do with vocabulary, a wide range of deepening vocabulary, listening, variety of forms of language, speaking, being able to cope with the unfamiliar, unexpected, reading, understanding just getting the important ideas about things, not necessarily understanding every single word and all of the grammar. And on the writing, being able to express their own ideas. So there we are, there's the summary again. These are the particular things to stress. It's authentic resources, things which being able to communicate based on vocabulary, grammar and phonics. Okay, over to the education.
Lovely. So I want to give you a little bit of a historical context. The current Ofsted framework came into operation in September 2019. Amanda Spielman has put a lot of emphasis on doing research, and so there was a thorough programme of research that Ofsted did through 2018-2019 around what they felt were the key factors in learning, teaching. So everyone was very aware in plenty of time as to the whole direction of travel of the September 2019 framework. And I've just realised inspections began in 2019, they went through till March 2020. I'm sorry, there's a mistake there when lockdown happened. So in fact, there were only about 5 or 6 months of inspections, and then they've paused and then have restarted in September 2021. So we haven't really had a lot of experience of that 2019 framework in practice. And in particular, the ones since September 2021 have been pretty much without outcome information. I've been in a situation, I've been through an Ofsted in November 2021, and there was no mention whatsoever of outcomes. The whole emphasis was on what the inspectors were seeing in the classroom. And that is so different from how it was under the previous framework. And therefore, really from a teacher perspective, and especially if you're a subject leader, there is a really heavy emphasis for you in a way that there wasn't in previous inspections, and on what they see in the classroom rather than any data that you may have. So the cognitive neuroscience is at the basis of the Ofsted research. What they're looking for is students to know and then be able to recall information. And you'll have been picking that up when you've looked at your schemes of work. And whatever subjects, this isn't just languages, the whole notion of retention, retrieval and recall, and then how that builds into your big picture sequencing is absolutely vital. And that also comes into the Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 situation. 5 or so subjects will have a deep dive. If you're selected for a deep dive, it's very intense focus. If you're not, you'll hardly notice that Ofsted have been in the school. Again, very different from previous frameworks. Right, let's now move on to the detailed curriculum research review for languages in 2021. And this has been hugely controversial, especially in languages. There's a little bit around Key Stage 2 reading, a little bit around maths, but it's languages that's been the most striking in terms of its narrow focus. It's pretty much drawing on research just from one stable, Emma Marsden and Ian Balcombe. And what I think is really concerning is the way that the views of other researchers, for example, Suzanne Graham on self-efficacy, has been distorted to fit in with their view of how things should be. And so we're delighted that Norbert Pachler is bringing together a special edition of the Language Learning Journal, coming out hopefully around Easter, which will allow the people whose research has been quoted in the curriculum research review to make it really clear what they were actually saying and not how it has been misinterpreted into that curriculum research review. So keep an eye out from that, because that really will be for you to be able to get it from the people who actually did the research in the first place. And just reiterate this point around the research review are may statements, not should. So an Ofsted inspector rocks up. As head of department, you'll have about 10 minutes to explain your view around sequencing, curriculum intent, etc. So it's really important that you're on the front foot. Don't have a document to read from. What they're looking for is, do you actually know it? Have you internalized it? And when you go around the classrooms in the next hour after you've had that chat, what will they see? Will it match what you've said? And that critical thing is, will it match what you've said? Do you know about the national curriculum? How have you been sequencing things? How do you revisit them? That notion of a spiral, particularly in languages where so often in lessons, you are automatically repeating or developing on further from what you've learnt in previous years. And really good that you've got brought together a central hymn sheet with the department and so on, so everybody knows what they're doing, because then that will make sure that when they go into lessons, what the inspectors see is what you said that they'll see.
Yes, although you're saying don't read from the hymn sheet, obviously, even though Ofsted are saying we don't expect you to prepare for these things, you just have to know it. Obviously, we're going to talk about it with our departments, aren't we? We're obviously going to reflect on things. And that's where I've recently got in touch with involved with the school, where we were thinking, well, how can you prepare for a possible inspection? And yes, actually, we have looked at what's in the EIF, what is expected on the intent, and then you could write down your response to the intent. What's expected for implementation, get ready to be ready with your, what have you, how do you implement the curriculum? And when it comes to impact, yes, when there are outcomes, be ready to be able to discuss them. So even though, you shouldn't be necessarily giving them a document, reading aloud from it, obviously you've prepared beforehand what questions you're likely to be asked. So you could have something like, I could call it a curriculum conversation, couldn't you, where the MFL curriculum at our place, here's our intent. And it's at that point that you could have, we follow the Key Stage 3 national curriculum, its aims, the purpose of study, attainment targets. But in particular, it could be that you're ready for this. We note recommendations in Ofsted do not take account of certain things with the national curriculum. We still are doing the things from the national curriculum. So to have had that conversation beforehand with colleagues and be ready to say that. So you'll be thinking about these sorts of things, won't you? The provision, the profile, pedagogy, make sure that you've got your common approach there, and have a little document where you're showing Ofsted what it is you are doing and what it is you're planning, because certainly I'm right, aren't I, that they are not expecting everybody to always to have the complete end curriculum, but they do want to see that you've thought about it and that you've got plans for what you're going to be doing in future. In particular, sequencing, I don't know whether you want to speak to this or I shall, that you know, be ready really to challenge this simplistic idea of sequencing. It's applied to all subjects, but we know that in languages, it's a natural thing that we do that. We teach avoir before we teach the perfect tense, but we're not paranoid on making sure that everybody, you know, that nobody can see anything new. If Stromae comes out with a new song and I like it, I play it to my classes, even if it contains words that they haven't seen before. We allow for authentic. We take them, you know, hopefully, as the Maison Clairefontaine was saying, I'm really looking forward to taking children to France again. We'll prepare them for the experiences they've had, even if boulangerie, boucherie are not on the most frequent word list. We're going to teach them those words, aren't we?
How to go to the toilet.
How to go to the toilet. That's the one that I'm going to be known for. I'm always using that. You know, toilet is about 4,127 on the list, but I am actually going to teach them that word, even though it's not there. And the other thing I think importantly is we don't wait for mastery before we move on. If you've got a mixed ability class of 30, I'm not going to wait until everybody has got that word before I introduce something which is new.
Can I just add that obviously if the students are not getting it, you don't move on. It's important to make sure that the class have got what you're trying to teach in the sense that they can play it back to you, but that doesn't mean as a commentator they've permanently got it. It's just that sense of what you don't do is move on whilst they haven't got or understood what you've been trying to do, but it's this simplistic mastery concept that's unhelpful, particularly in languages where you are going to keep coming back and reinforcing the phrasing just because that's how you teach languages.
Because those words novice, expert, they come up, don't they, in all of the subjects. And I think particularly in languages, you can be a novice at the beginning of the lesson. 40 minutes later, you could be an expert. Apparently, next lesson, you've forgotten it. And that's something which it's a known, you talk about the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, that it's known that people do forget things.
Yeah, and just think about yourself, how much do you forget about what you did yesterday?
Yes, David.
No, I was mean about myself. Okay.
So I do think it's really worthwhile familiarise yourself with those enselp resources. They are, if you like, the manifestation of what is expected. That's come from the stable that we've been talking about. So do look at them. They're free resources offered. Know where they are, look at them, take what you feel is useful. There's some good things there. And there are some reports of schools absolutely loving them. If you look on the website, there are 20 testimonials of people saying that it's really great. Equally, there are reports of schools who have dropped them. They've started them and found it's not for them. So you decide to do what's best for you. But we would say don't get bounced into it. Don't do something you don't feel works for your school. And
that's where there may be an issue with, for example, the senior leadership team, who obviously are anxious around the overall rating of the school, might pick up somewhere, oh, you must do enselp or something in order to get a good Ofsted. That isn't the case. You can get good Ofsted without that, but it's important that you're on the front foot. And as I said, just don't get bounced into it. Okay. We'll do some more on that in another webinar. Okay, overall advice about Ofsted. Stick to the methods then you know, working for your learners, be able to describe what they can do. But do familiarise yourselves with all of this background stuff. So make sure that you do know what those May statements are. So for example, in the school where I've been giving a bit of support, we've just made sure that we've got a document which has got all of the May statements there that people can have, as well as the national curriculum. Now, what about the subject content proposals, David? Fine. You'll be aware that when the subject content proposals came out all of a sudden last March, we moved very quickly to try and get information out to people, to give a wider context, to unpick them, to highlight some of the inconsistencies, etc. And then later on in the summer, we held further ones to explain in more detail what was going on. Now that the decision has been reached, we'll have a specific webinar in order to go through that in a lot of detail. But in the meantime, just to pick up some of the key points, the review group was selected by the DFE. Again, of just the same people who'd been on the previous ones, and they had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. The consultation came out suddenly in March, no warning to anybody else, and only a short timeline, and teachers were absolutely focused on getting the tags complete. Told there was a very overwhelmingly positive response. We sort of held the webinars to actually unpick it further and highlight the issues that were coming out of it, and the polls that were done by ALL showed an overwhelming rejection of the proposals. APPG, the all-party parliamentary group on modern languages, were very good. They brought together a range of organisations and a statement urging a reconsideration, and over 1,000 teachers signed that publicly. Tantalisingly, when you look at the DfE consultation, there were about 600 in favour, which must have been the ones who responded very quickly. And then once people were clear around the implications, the vast majority were against, but it was only 400. So of that 1,000, unfortunately, 600 or so didn't have the time because they were getting busy for tagged, etc., to respond negatively. It's life. The world, we need to move on, but we can be confident that the vast majority of teachers who actually expressed something publicly were against the consultation proposals. And what was really significant was all of the representative groups who responded, whether that's ALL, ASCL, ISMLA, other organisations, the exam boards, were pretty much against most of the proposals. There were a few of them which everyone supported, like putting the questions in English and so on. And what's really interesting is that there's a consultation analysis that the DfE have put together, and they have put the detailed reasoned arguments from each of those organisations together. So if you want to see the strong arguments, reasoned arguments that were put forward, they have published it, which is actually really very, very powerful. But it does really highlight how important it is that everybody does try and respond to DfE consultations, because otherwise they will say, oh, well, the majority of teachers were in favour, even when we know that that actually wasn't the case.
Joe Barber's made a good point that sometimes people put things through as a school, perhaps feeling that represented them. Well, actually, no, it was really one vote.
Well, because, for example, the APPG asked if the 1,000 votes, instead of 1,000 people that they'd had would count, and the answer was no, that counts as one. And that's, again, that's tough. But delighted now to pass over to Judith, not just around the subject content ahead, but even more pertinently, what's coming up this summer. So Judith, ever so kind of you to come along, and it's always really helpful to get such practical advice. Judith.
Oh, thank you. Thanks ever so much, David and Helen, and I'm delighted to be here this morning. I couldn't think of a better way to spend my Saturday morning. As you can imagine, it's been a bit hectic over the last week, but I've got lots of information to share with you. So I'm just going to share my screen. You will get a copy of the presentation afterwards, so don't worry about that. There is a lot of text in it, but I think it's really important that you have this information in writing. So I know it's going against all of the advice about PowerPoints. There is a lot of detail in there, but at least you have that detail and you can take it away and share it with colleagues. If you've got any questions, I mean, I'm hoping that I'm going to answer a lot of your questions as we go through the presentation. I would suggest that wait to the end of each section, and if you still have got a question, pop it in the chat, and then hopefully we'll have time at the end to cover off those questions. If you think of a question that hasn't been covered and it's still something that's bothering you, then I'll give you the contact details for AQA, and you can pop that by email to us, and we'll be able to give you an answer there.
And can I just say, Judith, because we have run a little bit later, please feel free to go beyond your time. I know you needed 40 minutes. So.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Yeah, great stuff. All right, just give me a nod, Helen, when everybody can see.
I can, yes.
Perfect, lovely. Coming all the way from North Yorkshire this morning, so it takes a bit of time. Lovely. Right, so this is what we're going to cover. We're actually going to look back at 2021. I know it probably seems like a lifetime ago, but there is some helpful information there, and it just gives you a good overview of that sort of landscape in our subject area. We're going to talk briefly about the autumn 2021 series. I've got some information to share with you there about availability of materials and things. Summary of changes for 2022. I know that's something that you'll all be really keen to hear about, and just to confirm exactly what things are going to look like in 2022 for MFL. And then, as Helen and David mentioned, a brief overview of the new GCSE French, German, Spanish subject content. I will just say that, you know, this is a brief overview. Clearly, we've just had it for a week. I'm not going to be able to tell you, you know, what the AQA specification is going to look like. So just managing expectation there. But it will just give you an understanding, and I'm going to share with you some links as to, you know, how to access the various documents that Helen and David have referred to there. So, you know, it will be useful for you to go in and then look at some of these materials. And then we'll finish off with just a summary of the support that's available from AQA, just to make sure that you're not missing out on anything there. So this slide gives you the entry information for 2019, 2020 and 2021 nationally. So I've included 2019 and I'll explain why later on in the presentation. So what you've got here is the entry numbers by language, but you've also got the outcomes. So in the third column along, you can see the proportion of students that were gaining a grade 7 and above, a grade 4 and above, and a grade 1 and above. So you can see that in 2019 for French, 24.3% of students got a grade 7. In 2020, it went up to 30.7. And then in 2021, it went up to 33.8. So some quite significant differences there in the outcomes, obviously because of the situation we found ourselves in with COVID. So that's just useful for you to reflect on in terms of the entries. Sadly, we've got that drop in entry for German, which you know, is very disappointing. But Spanish, you know, leaping up there, and a slight drop in French. So this is the AQA entry data, and you can see that despite we had that drop overall nationally in French, we did actually increase the number of entries. German, that big drop of 3,500 there, which does fit with some of the anecdotal comments that we've been getting from teachers saying that, you know, German is being offered less and less in schools, and a preference now towards Spanish and French rather than French and German. And then, as I mentioned, that increase in Spanish there. So nice to see increases where they happen. So this just gives you a summary of the AQA outcomes for candidates from 2020 and 2021. So you can see that fits with that national picture as you'd expect. Now in 2021, you remember we had the speaking endorsement. So students were rewarded for their speaking skills, getting a distinction, a merit or a pass. And you can see there the proportions of students that were getting each of those various levels in the different languages. And that's just really good for you to see. So AQA, we have 7 small entry GCSE languages. Now, clearly, the impact of COVID has been significant on the ability of some students, particularly those students who are learning, you know, outside of the school, which the majority do for these languages, and their access to qualifications. So there's a lot of work that went on to try and ensure that students did still have the opportunity to take qualifications in languages that aren't taught as part of a curriculum in schools. And we can see there were some changes there between 2021 and 2020. So a better picture in 2021 than in 2020, actually. So this slide gives the same data for AS. So AQA still offers AS levels in French, German, Spanish, and we haven't got any plan to change that. So again, you can just see the differences in outcomes there. And the same for A level. And you can see there are quite significant differences in the proportions of students. So for example, if you look at French, you can see in 2019, 10% of students were getting an A star. In 2020, that went up to 20.4, and in 2021 up to 26.7. And you may recall that there was some press coverage around results day talking about you know, the proportions of students in A-level languages getting A star awards. So you know, there is quite a significant difference in there. And I'll be talking a little bit more about standards in 2022 later on in the presentation. So we offer 4 smaller entry languages at A level, and they were scheduled to have their first award of a new specification in 2020, and clearly COVID disrupted lots of plans for students to enter these languages. In fact, in Bengali, we didn't have any entries in 2021. So 2022, you know, as long as exams go ahead, that will be the first, you know, proper sort of summer series for these languages. So moving on to the autumn series now. So GCSE results day for the autumn series is the 24th of February, and A-level results day was the 16th of December. Now, the question papers for the autumn series are available in Centre Services now for you to use as mock exams. Centre Services is the new replacement for what we used to call EAQA, so we're moving across to something called Centre Services. And the mark schemes for the GCSE papers will be available from the 7th of February. So that's earlier than results day. So it will help for those teachers wanting to mark mock exams. And the A-level mark schemes were published on the 8th of December. So if you didn't know that, they are available now in Centre Services. Now, just a bit of a health warning there. Obviously, the entry numbers in the autumn series are very small. It is an exceptional series. So whilst we have grade boundaries, they should clearly be viewed with caution. And there is a warning about that in the documentation giving the outcomes. Now, we've got past papers from the 2020 exam series, and they've actually just gone on to our public website on the 18th of January. So if you were intending to use those as mock exams with your students, just remember that they are actually on the public website, and we know how cute some students are in terms of keeping an eye on what's become public, so they may have accessed those already. And just a reminder that the past papers and mark schemes from 2021 will remain on Centre Services, so they're only available to teachers and to exams officers. And just to finally say, please do keep question papers and mark schemes that you access in Centre Services secure, because we really do want to keep them so that other teachers can use them as unseen papers and mocks, and not be sharing them publicly, because clearly they're in Centre Services for a reason. So just to ask you for your cooperation there. So thinking about summer 2022, and also this was the case for the autumn 21 papers for writing. So in 2021 autumn series, the writing paper included that additional optionality, and that will apply in summer 2022 also. So it's really great that students actually have a mock exam which follows that same format, because we all know the importance of students being familiar with what they're going to be faced with in their actual exam. So the writing papers include an additional optional question for the overlap question at both tiers. So that's question 4 at foundation, question 1 at higher, and for higher tier question 2. So one optional question on each themes means that students can answer on their preferred theme. And for each optional question, the title of the theme is given in the introduction to the question in the question paper, and we've produced a sample question paper in French to show the layout, and I'll show that to you in a moment if you haven't seen it already. Students still only answer one question, but it's from a choice of 3. And an important point, there's no restriction at higher tier if students want to answer question 1 and question 2 on the same theme. So I think that's quite a positive thing. So this slide, it might be a useful one to share with your students. It just summarises, where the optionality is and what that looks like. So at foundation tier, we've got question 1, question 2, and question 3 as normal. And then when we get to question 4, we've got 4.1, 4.2, or 4.3, and they follow the themes. And same at higher tiers. So you've got the optionality in both question 1, question 2, and then the translation, which is question 3. So a really important point to mention, because of this increased optionality, the question and answer books are much longer than they would be in a normal series. So students should really take care to make sure they answer all questions, particularly at higher tier, where question 3, which is that translation into the target language, will appear towards the end of the question and answer booklet. So that's a really important point for you to flag to your students as part of exam prep. Make sure they don't forget to do the higher tier translation. Now, to give students time to read the optional questions carefully, which as we all know is very, very important, we've added an extra 5 minutes to the exam time. So the foundation tier exam lasts for 1 hour and 5 minutes and higher tier writing 1 hour and 20 minutes. And those changes are on the AQA timetable. So I mentioned a sample paper to show the layout. This is where you can find it in the assessment resources tab. And the paper just demonstrates the layout and structure only. They're not new questions. The questions have been taken from previous papers. And as I said, we've only done one sample in French because really all we're demonstrating is the actual layout and format. So that's all students need to be familiar with. So there are no sample papers in every language. So this is what the question paper looks like. So it says very clearly at the top, answer either question 4.1 or 4.2 or 4.3. And a reminder to students, only answer one of these questions. Now, we know that even in a normal exam series, we do get some students who decide to answer more than one. If that happens, just to reassure you, both questions are marked and the higher mark that they get goes forward towards their final grade. So, you know, hopefully we won't get students doing all 3 questions because clearly they're not going to do themselves any favours if they're spending time on 2 questions when actually they really want to focus on one. I remember in the olden days, we once had one poor student who did all of the role plays in a speaking test, and the poor examiner was absolutely, couldn't believe it. Yes, I'd gone through the lot, but there we go. It was an awful long speaking test. So again, in this example, you can see it says very clearly 4.1, theme 1, identity and culture. And then the rest of the question is exactly as all of the examples that they've practiced in the past. So there's no change to the actual layout of the task. So we hope that that's really clear for students. And then the same at higher tier, reminder about only answering one, and it says clearly 2.1, theme 1. So in terms of other changes, there was a removal of the regulatory requirement for assessments to use words outside of the vocab lists and the regulatory permission to gloss where necessary. I mean, we have always glossed in past papers anyway, so that really wasn't something new for us, but we only gloss where necessary. So we have reviewed all of our question papers for 21 and 22 exams and made appropriate changes at both tiers to reflect this. However, we will still include a number of basic vocab items, so things like primary colours, cognates, which aren't listed in the specification. They won't be glossed and students may need to understand them, but if we did exclude such items, that would be likely to increase the demand of the task, which is not the purpose of the changes. So just to be aware of that. So moving on to speaking for summer 2022, so Ofqual had a consultation and published the outcomes of that, and they confirmed that spoken language in 2022 will be assessed in the normal way through formal speaking tests. There have been contingency arrangements which were published for MFL, and those contingency arrangements for our subject are basically a return to the speaking endorsement which we had in 2021. So in that consultation response, teachers are required to have regard to the speaking endorsement assessment criteria throughout the course, because if at any point it becomes clear that speaking tests can't take place because of the public health situation, then Ofqual does reserve that right to implement those contingency arrangements right up until the period when speaking tests take place. And we've kept all of the training materials for the speaking endorsement on our website, so you've got a link there, and that includes the AQA checklist, which I know lots of teachers found really helpful last year to use. So they're all still there, including the presentations as well. Now, clearly, it's over 2 years since teachers have had formal speaking tests, so we really are pushing for you to remind yourselves about conducting speaking tests. You know, it's a very important part of the GCSE. It's worth 25%. We know how much teacher conduct can impact on students' marks, because it's really important that you adhere to all of the various rules around conduct of the speaking test. So please, your homework from today is to go and use that link and review those speaking materials. There's a fabulous presentation that's been there on our website since the start of the specification, which takes you through the speaking test in full. So please, you know, do take the time. And those of you who are heads of department, you may have teachers who've never actually conducted a speaking test for a live exam. So make sure that they review those materials as part of their preparation. So AS and A-level speaking components weren't part of that Ofqual consultation, but the plan is that, as I said, that formal speaking tests will take place in line with that announcement that exams are going ahead as normal in 2022. So we are offering both the teacher conducted option and the visiting examiner option, and you always have to have at least 8 students per language for that, but that would be reviewed if government guidelines change, so just to be aware of that. And again, we've got a full set of training materials on conducting those tests on our website. So again, if you're preparing students for A-level, or in fact conducting the tests yourselves, please do go and review those training materials. So moving on to advance information. So hopefully you'll all be clear that exam boards are going to provide advance information. And that was for all subjects except GCSE English Lit, History, Ancient History and Geography. And there was some principles around advance information which were set out very clearly in the consultation document. So the policy intention of advance information is to support students' revision. So by the 7th of February at the latest, you will get some information, and that information will help you plan and adapt your teaching in the second half of the spring term. Now, this is for 2022 only, and the intention at the moment is for exams to go ahead as normal in 2023. JCQ produced some really helpful information about advanced information. So if you want to have a look at that, I've given you the link at the bottom of this slide. So advanced information for GCSE. So it is going to be provided for paper 4 writing only for both foundation and higher tiers. And the advanced information will identify the specification topics, which will be the focus of the assessment, listed in specification order. There won't be any advanced information for the translation questions, and this is consistently being applied across all AQA GCSE language specifications. And the link to the summary of the changes is there at the bottom of the slide. So that's the gives you the scope of the advanced information for GCSE. For AS and A level, so just to confirm, for AS, it's for paper 1, paper 2, section A, which is the translation, and paper 3, and it will identify the sub-themes and bullet points from the spec listed in specification order. And then for A level, it will be for paper 1 and paper 3, and for paper 3, it just be for part 1, which is the discussion of the sub-theme. And again, it will identify the sub-themes and bullet points from the spec in specification order. So there's a clear principle there across all of the qualifications in terms of what's available. For the small entry languages, we've got advanced information again for paper 1, which is the reading and the translation, and paper 3, listing the sub-themes and bullet points. So moving on to grading standards. So this is some information that came from Ofqual around grading standards in 2022. So this isn't specific for languages, this applies to all subjects, but I thought it was helpful just to confirm this to you as part of my presentation today. So next year is going to, i.e. 2022, which is not actually next year now, is it? Will be a transition year to reflect a recovery period. So grade boundaries will be set reflecting a midway point between 2021 and 2019, so that more students get higher grades in 2022 than before the pandemic. So before the pandemic is 2019. So Ofqual have said that this approach will provide a safety net for 2022 students, as well as a step back to normality. And then the expectation is that results go back to the usual grade profile by 2023. So they've said that results overall will be higher than in 2019, but not as high as 2020. And the exact position will vary by subject and grade. So they can't be precise at the moment because obviously schools haven't made entries, and we know that shifts in entry patterns can impact this. So sometimes we might get more or fewer able students than previous years, and it's important that that's reflected in the outcomes, and that can vary quite significantly within different subjects. And of course, senior examiners haven't reviewed any student work, which we know is really important, and we can't set grade boundaries until we've actually had the exam and reviewed student work. So this process is to allow pre-pandemic relationships to be re-established. So just to sort of reflect back, and I did mention at the beginning we'd look at 2019. So they've said that the results, so if we look at French, for example, that results will be higher than in 2019. So in 2019, we had 24.3% of students getting a grade 7. But not as high as 2020. So 2020 had 30.7. So the outcomes will be somewhere between 24.3 and 30.7 as a sort of general principle, with that caveat around there may be differences in different subjects. So that's just to give you an overview of what that might look like. Now, I'm sure lots of you will remember that there was a grading adjustment for GCSE French and German. Ofqual did some research into grading standards, and they instructed us to make an adjustment in French and German. So that was +1% at grade 4 and +2% at grade 7 and grade 9. And that was for the 2020 exam series. And if anyone's interested, you can look at the report there at the link. So in 2020, the adjustment was made for any students awarded a calculated grade. And that's where a calculated grade was awarded when it was compared to the centre grade and was the higher of the two grades. And I know this sounds really complicated, but it does make sense. So they compared a calculated grade, had the adjustment included in it, and the centre assessed grade didn't. And then Ofqual advised that any students who awarded the centre assessed grade had had the adjustment applied because that grade was higher than the calculated grade, which included the adjustment. So I know that sounds quite hard to get your head around, but it does make sense when you read it carefully. So in terms of what's going to happen in 2022, we are going to be discussing with Ofqual, or my colleagues in our standards team will discuss the implications for the 2022 exam series. And then as soon as we have any information on that, we will, of course, share that with you. So just to reassure you that, that hasn't been forgotten, it is being discussed, and we will keep you posted on what that looks like. So now moving on to the summary, David and Helen mentioned that I was going to be giving you for the new GCSE subject content. As I said, it's very fresh and new. So, I will just give you a very broad overview. So there was a public consultation in spring 2021, and we've got the changes there. So you've got links to the consultation outcomes and to the new subject content documentation. And Ofqual also had a consultation, and that's been published. So this is for first teaching in September 24 and first exam in 26. So it has been pushed back a year. The original proposal was 2023 and 2020-25 for first exam. So the normal process is that accredited specifications and specimen papers are in schools at the start of September 2023, which is 1 year in advance of teaching. So in terms of the next stage in the process, there will be the Ofqual consultation on what's called the subject level conditions and guidance. Now, as Helen and David mentioned, it is really important that you give your views, and the sorts of things that are covered in the subject level conditions and guidance are things like, how long the translation might be, how many words will be in the translation, how long is the speaking test going to be, what's the preparation time going to be. So they're sort of technical things, but they are very important things. And you know, sometimes it's only people like exam boards who respond to these as subject associations, but it's really important that teachers give their views, because it, as David said, it's your opportunity, and, you know, one vote counts. So, you know, do look out for that. It will be fairly imminent, I suspect. We haven't got a date for it at the moment, but I imagine that Ofqual will be releasing that soon. So we've got revised assessment objectives to reflect the change in the content. So those colleagues who are familiar with A-level will sort of recognise this sort of assessment objective structure. Clearly at GCSE, we have a very straightforward assessment objective structure where literally it's 25% for each separate skill. So these assessment objectives are a little different because they are combined. Tiered assessments are going to be maintained for GCSE MFL, and a single tier of entry. So we're not going back to that system where you could enter for a different skill in a different tier. So there'll be, you'll either enter for foundation or for higher. We've still got what's called non-exam assessment for the assessment of speaking skills, and that requirement that the speaking skill is worth 25% of the total mark. So that's all been consulted on and confirmed. So the really big change here is around the vocabulary. So, you know, as Helen and David mentioned, this was consulted on. So the final outcome is that students will be expected to know 1,200 items at foundation and 500. And they have broaden the definition of vocabulary to word families. So that does mean that the number of words is actually higher than that, because there are words within a word family that students will be expected to know. Very important point is that students are expected to know and use the content receptively and productively. And there's no assumption of prior knowledge. So that's quite important, because in our current specifications, we don't include vocabulary items that we would expect students to know from prior study from Key Stage 3. So things like colours, you know, we wouldn't normally include. Now, the vocabulary has to be taken from an appropriate corpus of at least 20 million words in the language. And the whole issue of appropriate corpus is one that's caused a lot of discussion. If you've ever looked at any of these things, you can see the scope of sources that are used in these things, like, you know, medical documents, court reports, manuals for scientific things. It's the whole range of sources is absolutely massive. It's not what you would expect, the sort of language that your average 16-year-old student might be wanting to access. So that's something that we commented on, you know, very significantly. You'll also notice, if you read the subject content document, that the corpus that's specified as, well, recommended for French is from 2009. Now we're now in 2022, so that does seem that, you know, for example, will the word pandemic be in the 2009 corpus? So that is something that, you know, we did pick up. The French, the German and the Spanish are 2018 and 2019, so more recent, but for French it is 2009. So I think that is going to be a challenge that we're going to have to deal with. And at least 85% of the words have to be from the 2,000 most frequent words occurring in the language, according to the corpus. And the vocab list can include 30 short phrases, which are multi-word units, and 20 items to refer to relevant geographical cultural places, including names of countries. So we know in Spanish, for example, there are lots of Latin American countries that, in fact, there are quite a lot of them to be included there. So that's definitely something that we have to think about in terms of what we choose to be in that particular section. So in terms of the grammar requirements are set out, and the annexes, they're pretty big, as you'll see, anybody who's already had a look at them. And the requirements for higher tier include everything that's specified for foundation. And again, they've got to demonstrate receptive and productive knowledge of the grammar from the list. Some items from the grammar list have to appear in the vocabulary list, and you've also got those requirements for the sound symbol correspondence in the annexes too. So again, that's for you to have a look at. Now for reading, only the higher and overlapping tier text can include some words which are outside the vocab list. So we've got to provide English meanings of such words, and we can't have any more than 2% of words in any given text. Now, clearly, if words are glossed, they're not going to be suitable for testing as discrete items. So that's something that we're going to have to consider carefully. Proper nouns that are not on the vocab list and not easily understood have to be glossed or explained, and up to 2% of words can be true and exact cognates, and there's a definition of what they feel is a true and exact cognates, not included in the vocab list in the subject content document. So themes and topics. Now, this was an absolutely very contentious point of view in terms of the original proposals, and we know that it's something that lots of teachers contacted us about. We know that it was one of the most strongest responses in the consultation, and they have now said that specification should identify a limited number of broad themes or topics with relevance to the countries or communities. Now, there's lots of research out there that says very, very clearly about the importance of themes and topics in any sort of language specification. Professor James Milton, for example, made that point very clearly in one of the panel events that we ran when the consultation was live, that students have to have some sort of context to what they're learning about, what they're speaking about, what they're writing about. And this is one thing I can tell you about the AQA specification. We will be having some element of themes and topics, because it just gives that overall coherence to the actual specification that we're going to design. But clearly the restrictions around the vocabulary are going to make that quite challenging, because you can't have a topic if there aren't any words in the top 2,000 or in your 15% that you might want to include. So when you might look at something like pets, how many pets come into the top 2,000? That 15% of words, will be eaten up quite quickly, I suspect. As Helen mentioned, there are some words that, don't appear for a long way beyond 2,000. Things like days of the week. In Spanish, Tuesday isn't in the top 2,000. So, clearly we wouldn't want to publish a vocabulary list with only some days of the week included. So I think we'll be adding Tuesday, put it that way. I can see everybody, smiling there. And some other, really keywords. And we did flag a lot of this up in our consultation response about the challenges of, producing something that is actually coherent and, logical for students to be learning about. The question types, so comprehension tasks based on written and spoken tests will have questions in English, which I think people are generally aware, we were keen on having anyway, and the rubrics will be in English. Now, there are two new tasks to draw to your attention. The first one is a dictation exercise, and that's got to include some vocabulary from outside the lists, and reading aloud of a short written text with a short unprepared conversation. So they're new elements, and you'll obviously have your own views about those. So that's all I'm going to say on the subject content review, but I would say do download the information. It is significant in terms of changes, and obviously what we're really looking for is for help and support from people like yourselves, practicing teachers, subject associations, to help us develop the best possible specification that we can. I don't think anybody's not clear on the fact that exam boards did oppose a lot of the changes that have been brought in, but we are where we are, and we will move ahead to specification development, obviously, but we will really need and appreciate the help from practicing teachers to try and get something that is going to be engaging for you to teach and for your students to learn, and have assessments which do reflect both the requirements of the subject content, as well as sensible things in terms of how we want language to be assessed in the future. So moving on to support from AQA. So we had two main themes for you in terms of supporting your students. So fundamental skills, we ran those in autumn 2020, and those materials are available in centre services. That includes an actual recording of one of the meetings, as well as all of the materials, and then the supporting student progression courses as well. They're available in centre services. And at the moment, we have a programme of meetings running for French, German, Spanish on supporting student exam preparation. We've had some already. We've had excellent feedback from teachers. It's always good to get new ideas and to share new ideas. It's not going to be, the answer to everything, but there are some really great resources in those sessions, and they're free of charge and online. There are still some places available, so if you haven't got booked onto one, you would like to, just use the link, go to our professional development page on our website and see if there are still places available. But the materials will be made available to you if you can't manage to attend. So something else that we've been running last year and this year, it's available until the end of March, they're mark scheme engagement courses. Now, we've had really great feedback on the GCSE writing courses. So if you haven't taken part in this, I really would recommend it, because it basically takes you through each of the writing tasks. It talks to you about the requirements of the mark scheme, and then you actually do some sample marking in your language. So it's for French, German, and Spanish, and it really is good. And we've actually had teachers who've said they've enjoyed it so much and they feel confident that they do actually want to do some marking for us in that skill. And as we all know, having that benefit and really good understanding of the assessment criteria really does help you prepare your students for their exams. So do have a look at that. Now for A-level, it's new. So we cover the summaries, the translations, and the essays. So really valuable time there as part of your professional development. And that's all free of charge. We have some vocab and grammar tests that we published last year. So if you haven't seen those already, I've put links in there. They're really good. There's one test on each of the topics for GCSE. And very, very important, again, this is your second piece of homework, instructions for the conduct of the exams. It's available. It's so important. Please do make sure that you go away and you download it. It's got all of that really helpful information in about the speaking test in particular, which, as I said, it's crucial. You need to remind yourselves of all of the requirements of the test, what you need to say, how long each section has to last, to make sure you're absolutely on point for conducting your tests this summer. So please do make the time to actually download that. And if you're a head of department, any teacher who's involved in exams must be familiar with that. So some of you already use Exam Pro, which is a wonderful resource in terms of creating tests. Something called Merit, we had it last year. It's something that you can use as a mock reporting tool. And it's one of those things that the more teachers who actually use it, the better the outcomes, because you get a much bigger picture in terms of the scope of the students that are included. So it's really good because you put the marks in for each student, and then you get individual student and class reports. So it's really good to identify gaps in students' knowledge. And we also issue population means and rankings. So again, the more students that are entered, the better those means. So that costs £50 for the year, and that gives you access for GCSE French, German, Spanish for the one fee. So there is some really useful reporting that can be taken out of Merit. So it's only for French, German, Spanish. It's got the 2019 and 2020 papers included, so you put in results for those. And then the 2021 papers will be included from February 2022. So it gives you that detailed analysis by topic. It doesn't include speaking, and there is more information on the Exam Pro website, and they're more than happy to talk you through that if you get in touch with them. So finally, just to give our contact details, and hopefully everybody got the email from me it was this week, wasn't it? Yes, this week, about the subject content being published. Now, I did see comments on social media from teachers saying, oh, well, I didn't get an email. So I'm afraid you only get the emails if you actually sign up for them. All of these rules around GDPR, you have to subscribe to our email updates. So if you're not subscribed, and if you didn't get that email from me this week, please do go to that link in the presentation. It's at the bottom of your subject page, and sign up for the updates. Because if ever there was a time when it's really important for us to be able to contact you, it's now. So don't miss out on something. If you're not sure if you're subscribed or not, then you can always contact our team. Just drop an email to the MFL mailbox and they'll check that you're on our system. But it is really important that we can contact you easily and quickly and share information with you, because particularly at the moment where there's potential for changes and things like that. So really important. And as I say, if you've got any queries that we don't manage to answer in the session today, then just use that MFL mailbox, drop us a line, and we'll get back to you, because it is really important that you've got all of the information that you need. And we normally get back to you either that day or the next day, so it's a really, really good service. Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was fantastic. So if people...
Have I massively overrun? I'm so sorry.
No, you haven't. No, you haven't. No, you've done the time that you said you're going to. So clap, clap, clap. If you'd like to clap in the chat, that'd be fine.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
It's a lot to take in, isn't it?
Well, I know that you've said we will pass on any questions to you, but there are a couple of questions which stood out. One was the advanced information. Tim was asking for the advanced information about the writing questions.
Yes.
Would you give us information about the subtopic?
I can't say anything more than what's in that information. So until you get it on the 7th of February. Yeah, I'm afraid.
In a way, I was just assuming that we already know it's going to be a theme 1, a theme 2, and a theme 3. So surely it must be. But okay, so Tim was asking that question. And there's also a question about the dictation as to whether or not that would be recorded. Presumably that's something that will come up in the off-qual conditions. We'll let that discussion.
Yes, that's like a technical thing, so that's likely to, yeah.
And someone else asking about the availability of the sample papers. Are they always available?
They will be available with the specification, so they'll be in schools by September 23.
Okay.
So 1 year in advance of teaching.
Okay, so thanks so much. We've just got a sort of 5-minute roundup now, just in response to what you've been saying. Really just to say, as we said from the outset, ALL is planning a follow-up webinar where we'll be really looking at what the new subject content is and thinking about how we as an association and as teachers can respond. We have really valued the fact that the exam boards, all of these stakeholders, as we called, we've been meeting together, and there really is cooperation between us all. So how can we respond? So here are some slides which are just a preview of what we will be going through when we do the webinar. So we'll be acknowledging you know, the things that have happened, acknowledging the fact that actually there was a value in responding. There were some changes because people joined in. So there's the sorts of things which Judith had mentioned, but recognizing that those core principles are still there about the restriction of the fact that vocabulary has got to be restricted, and that the elements being tested are the vocab, phonics and grammar, as opposed to communication. We recognize the dilemma, which Judith has already mentioned, about the restrictions that there are, and seeing that there will be probably a restriction in the fact that, you know, technical issues, you've got the aim that is that people are going to secure full competency. Being able to distinguish between 6 grades and a higher level is going to be tough. There is this danger that it would then lead to having to set traps to be able to distinguish who are the absolute top. So we do understand that dilemma, and we'll be able to hopefully cooperate with the exam board to talk about that. So how can we help? Being patient, and I suppose I would say, please, exam boards, don't rush to do these specifications. Take time to think about it, so that really we can get the best that we can. There may be details where we can help. And I really like the fact that, Judith, you were saying that we must respond to the off-qual consultation on the subject conditions. So important, because those are the sorts of things which could really make a difference. So we've said it before, overall, we would say beware of teaching to the test. Just because it's limited doesn't mean that we don't have to do the things that are in the national curriculum. Really believe in yourself and your own professional expertise. You've had success with students working in a particular way, be proud, keep on with that. And above all, keep pupils motivated so they want to do the exam. We'll look at things to do with enselp as well at a future webinar, showing that enselp themselves use authentic text. Well, they devise texts from authentic texts, which is an example of one which is from a year 8 enselp, where all of those which are highlighted are words which are not within the 2000, and it's a lesson on how to use cognate. So there are resources in there which can help, even if you do believe that you can go beyond the 2000. We've mentioned right early on, be ready with your own responses to those Ofsted May statements, but above all, it's this collaboration and mutual support. Whatever we feel about what's gone on, it really is important that we move on together and we keep our pupils on board. Is that all right? Anything else that anybody else wants to say?
Super.
So this is it.
And 12 o'clock is when you...
12 o'clock is when we're going to be starting the next session. So thanks to everybody who's contributed, and we really look forward to your session, Judith, at 12 o'clock on film. We'll leave the room open, so if people still want to chat, that's fine. Okay, but I will stop the recording now.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.